Sometimes I'll have an idea for a single topic about the behind-the-scenes making of Club Penguin that can sustain a whole video. But other times there are just these little tiny bits of trivia that are better off being packaged together with other equally tiny bits of Club Penguin trivia and turned into a single video with an extremely clickbaity title. This is one of those times. Get ready for 10 things you didn't know about the making of Club Penguin.
Number 1. Polar bear moths.
It's a well-known fact that the first polar bear to set foot on Club Penguin was Herbert P. Bear. But did you know that polar bears could have been part of Club Penguin from the very beginning, even during beta testing? We had the idea where the moderators, the people who kept Club Penguin safe, mods for short, we had the idea that instead of having them walk around as regular old penguins, that they would instead walk around as polar bears. And in some ways it seemed like a great idea. They would obviously be very different from the penguins, they would be much bigger than penguins and would be obvious authority figures, and so I actually did create the polar bears. I created standing, sitting, and walking animations. However, when we tried putting them into Club Penguin in our own internal beta testing, we realized that there were a few really big problems with this approach. See, if you have polar bears walking around Club Penguin, they're not authority figures anymore, they're celebrities. They would get swarmed, and if you're swarmed, you don't have the advantage of being able to see penguins do what they're normally doing. You're just seeing them be all hyped up and asking you for clothing items and player card backgrounds and send me a postcard and all these kinds of things. The other problem with having polar bears as moderators is that if you enter a room in Club Penguin and it's obvious that there's not a polar bear there, it could actually seem like, oh, I can get away with doing more here. In the same way that a person driving down the highway might think that they're allowed to speed because there's no cops around. Having polar bears, something so different from penguins, be the moderators on Club Penguin, would actually serve to make Club Penguin less safe. And Club Penguin's two core values were make it safe, make it fun. And if it didn't pass one of those two core values, it usually didn't make it into the game. So the polar bears were nixed, they were never added to Club Penguin, and Herbert became the first polar bear acting in vengeance for his lost cousins, I guess?
Number 2. The Plaza Dojo.
For several years on Club Penguin, there was this space between the pet shop and the pizza parlor that was left unfilled. Nothing was in there. It looked like it should hold a building, but it didn't. What's the deal with that? Well, the original plan was that that's where the dojo would go. The dojo, which started out as a hidden building on one of the tallest mountains on Club Penguin, was originally planned to be airlifted down into the space between the pet shop and the pizza parlor once the ninja experience, whatever that was going to be, was built. However, the ninja experience kept getting delayed, and by the time Card Jitsu was finally being built and getting ready, the space had been filled with the stage. So the dojo remained on top of the mountain and just became a visible building instead of a hidden building. Here you can see the original concept art for what the dojo would have looked like between the pet shop and the pizza parlor. This was before the design of Puffles was created, and so a sample placeholder pet was put in there. Don't get any wrong ideas from this. Puppies were not part of the original plan of Club Penguin, even though Puppy Puffles came later. Puppy Puffles. Try saying that 5 times fast. Yeah.
Number 3. Belize.
Whenever you looked through the Club Penguin clothing catalog, near the very back there was a selection of country flags, with most of our popular penguin countries represented. You had Canada and the United States, and Britain and Brazil, and many other countries. But you may have noticed that wedged in amongst all these countries was the tiny nation of Belize. Was Belize a hotspot of Club Penguin fans? No, this was actually a reference to Chris Priebe. Chris, brother of Lance Priebe, who now heads up a company called Two Hat Security, was at the time a programmer for Club Penguin, but he was doing so remotely. Yes, he had a house for a few years down in Belize. And so we stuck Belize in there as a little reference to him and a reminder that, hey, you're not forgotten down there. We were always a little jealous of him, though, because in the middle of winter, he'd send up these pictures of him programming on his laptop on a hammock in the middle of really nice weather. Thanks, Chris.
Number 4. The Blue Cape.
The blue superhero cape was a clothing item that was added very early on to Club Penguin. But did you know that the blue superhero cape was the first clothing item that was added directly because of fan input? See, in early 2006, Club Penguin launched on a website called Miniclip. Miniclip was a home for dozens, hundreds, thousands of Flash games, and Club Penguin quickly rose to the top of the list of most played games on Miniclip. This meant that the Miniclip forums became a pretty big message board for the Club Penguin fans, and they would send ideas every once in a while, and one of the early ones that got a lot of support was, bring us a blue superhero cape. Well, creating a recolor of a clothing item was about the easiest way to make a clothing item on Club Penguin, so we added a blue superhero cape, hid it in a clothing catalog, and just told the fans, hey, you asked, we listened. This was a win-win. The fans realized that, yes, we were listening to them, and we got an even more rabid fan base who were peppering us with more suggestions and more questions, and telling their friends, hey, there's this game, and I suggested something, and it got into the game. It was great all around.
Number 5. Works of Fine Art.
Early in the furniture catalogs, there was an extremely expensive item called the Mona Penguin. It was a piece of penguin art that was patterned after the Mona Lisa. What you might not realize is that I actually made a few other paintings that did not end up making it into Club Penguin, based on American Gothic and Edvard Munch's The Scream. We decided to not put these ones in. I'm actually not sure why now. I think they might have made sense later on, but I still like them. They're funny.
Number 6. The real first Puffle.
You may have seen the very first drawings that I created as exploration into what Club Penguin pets might look like. What you did not see was the hideous monstrosity that was the first Puffle. See, after I created those first drawings, and myself and Lance and Lane were sitting around a computer trying to decide what sort of direction to take the pets, the conversation went like, okay, copy and paste this piece from this animal, and this piece from this animal, and maybe shift this other thing down, because the Puffles, they need a face, Chris. They need a face, they need to actually have a mouth. And so the very first Puffle was this Frankenstein version of what was finally created at the end of that rough brainstorming meeting. And here it is. Obviously, after this illustration was created, the very next job was to redraw it so that kids would actually want to adopt it. Because, no. Hi, I'm a Puffle! Yeah, no. No, no, no.
Number 7. Sony.
What you know is that Disney purchased Club Penguin in 2007. What you may have not known is that Disney was not the only media company that was looking to possibly purchase Club Penguin. Sony is the only other one that has been publicly named as a potential Club Penguin buyer. And there actually was a promotion at the time between Sony and Club Penguin before Disney purchased it. See, Sony was coming out with their own Penguin movie in 2007 called Surf's Up. And so we actually made a deal and had a little bit of a promotion going. There was a contest, and if you were a winner in that contest, you would get free Club Penguin membership for a while. We even had people from Sony come up to Club Penguin to talk to us about Surf's Up. They did a special screening of it that was a little bit advance of the real movie. I even got a beach towel. I'm still using the Surf's Up beach towel. If you haven't seen Surf's Up as a movie, just side note, I actually quite enjoy it. It's been kind of forgotten in the pantheon of penguin-based movies, but it's worth checking out.
Number 8. Green Puffles everywhere.
So there was this secret area of Club Penguin, a area with a completely different login, a test world. This world was called CPIP, the Club Penguin Improvement Project. And this was April Fool's Day. We wanted to do something really special there, and so we made it so that everyone walking around in the CPIP version of the Club Penguin world walked around as a green Puffle. The story behind this is that this was actually the technique I used when I was first creating the Puffles. I would animate the Puffles, and then I would get a copy of a localized version of Club Penguin that I could run on my own personal machine and change files in how I wanted to. And if I changed out the Penguin file with a Puffle file, I could test out the animations. If I did the dance, the Puffle would do one of the animations. If I did the sitting or the waving or the snowball throwing, the Puffle would do different animations. So I did this back in 2005 and then promptly forgot about it until the people making CPIP came up to me and said, what could we do to make Club Penguin Improvement Project a little crazier? And so I said, you want to have all the penguins walk around as Puffles? I think everyone enjoyed it. I think some kids wanted it to stay that way.
Number 9. Waterpark Furniture.
All right, so the igloo furniture building system in Club Penguin wasn't actually built from scratch for Club Penguin. Remember, at the time, Club Penguin was being built by New Horizon Productions, which was not only making Club Penguin, it was also working on projects for other clients. One of them was a water park building company based in Kelowna called Waterplay. At the time, Waterplay wanted New Horizon to build a water park builder where you could click and drag pieces of a water park into a sample area, and people wanting to make water parks could test out what the water park might look like before they actually built it for real and spent $500,000 on it. And so Lance used the knowledge from this water park builder to create the igloo furniture system that was put into Club Penguin.
Number 10. Lorem Ipsum.
During beta testing, if you clicked on the icon to read the Club Penguin newspaper, you would have been pretty disappointed. It contained a single comic and a front page, but the front page was not very informative because the only text on it was this strange garbled Lorem Ipsum dolor sit amet, whatever kind of text that is. Now, people in the publishing industry know this as Lorem Ipsum. It's a fairly famous block of nonsense Latin text that is meant to be a placeholder for a newspaper article or a magazine article or some block of text that will become something real later. But it's fair to say that the average 8 to 13-year-old has no clue what Lorem Ipsum means. And keep in mind, during the Club Penguin beta test period, the beta testers were being asked to send us bugs. And so you guessed it, one of the most frequent bug reports we got was, the text in the newspaper, it's not English. That's a bug. Okay. In all fairness, we probably should have put some real text there, but we were busy, we had other things going on. What I remember most about the Lorem Ipsum bug reports, though, is when there was a Club Penguin blog post, and the comments in the blog post were all about how the newspaper text was wrong. And then there was this wonderful, helpful penguin who said, no, guys, don't worry, they'll put English text in there later. Right now, they're just speaking Canadian. I like to think that was a joke, but I'm pretty convinced that this poor child actually thought that Canadian was a non-English language. Anyway, thank you for joining me on this outdoor walk through 10 facts about Club Penguin you didn't know. If you're wondering why I'm up in the mountains of Kelowna, it's because I like making videos in the mountains of Kelowna. I have some other videos that were made in the mountains of Kelowna, and you should check those out. Okay, thanks for watching, and waddle on.